Okay, guys, welcome to this next installment of In Conversation with right here on With Bass in Mind. Thank you so much for all the support over the last couple of months. I'm very, very, very pleased to introduce today's guest. I don't think you need actually any introduction, Victor. Good afternoon, sir. How are you?
I'm doing very well, Phil. Thanks for having me on your show.
Yeah, it's strange. I just say good afternoon, but obviously it's morning for you over there. You're
Yeah, I mean,
5
it's
hours behind me.
close enough to afternoon. Yeah.
Victor, we've been having some wonderful conversations here on With Bass in Mind. We've been bringing in a load of different guests. Bruce Getz, actually, from Berkeley, was with me just the other month.
Nice.
I'm sure I'll be calling Danny, maybe Steve in the future. I'd love to get those guys in and have a good chat. But With Bass in Mind is a platform. It's a way of reaching people, talking to people, sharing things that need to be said. And the continual theme of this platform has always been about just taking the gloves off and saying what needs to be said, okay, and have a debate about it, have a conversation about it. And just recently, I took delivery of The Spirit of Music, and it hit a very big chord with me because the entire motivation of With Bass in Mind seems to ring true of a lot of things you speak about in this text. First of all, congratulations on the release. Spirit of Music is out now. It's to follow up to the music lesson, and the lesson seems to be continuing. It's also grown. Michael's now joined with some new guests. We've got Ali, Seco, Uncle Clyde is in there now as well. But it's been a long time coming, buddy. Talk to us about the writing process. How's it been?
It went well. It ended up well, I'll say. I started writing, well, the music lesson book came out in 2008,
Yeah.
the official version. I released it about a year or so before on my own, but then a bigger company picked it up. But it came out around 2008. And in 2011, I started writing The Spirit of Music. I had the title, I had the concept, but it wasn't flowing the way the music lesson poured out in a couple of months, done, literally. And then we refined it, of course. But the spirit of music I felt like I was forcing it a bit. So I stopped writing until 2017. So I took, a good 5, 6 year from writing, came back to it thinking I was going to have to start over. But I read what I wrote and I went, whoa, there's something here. This is working. So I reshaped that, but went with the same theme that I was going with, and just finished it, and was very happy with it. Once I started in 2017, it was flowing again. And like a record, things take a while. Even once you're finished recording or writing, then you got to go through the other process of making it reach the public. So it took a while, and finally it's out. And there's an audio version too, Phil. I don't know if you've heard
I
the
have.
audio for the music lesson or for the spirit of music. But in every each version, each character is read by the person who inspired that character.
Okay.
So you mentioned Uncle Clyde. That's Chuck Rainey.
Is it Chuck?
So you hear Chuck Rainey's voice on
Oh,
both audiobooks
amazing.
because Chuck, to me, he's Uncle Clyde. He's just this older, wise man, African American man with full of stories and wisdom, but loves you and wants you, the student, to grow.
Yeah.
My friend Michael, I got a friend named Michael who I patterned the character Michael after. And so all these people read their lines. And in the new audiobook, one of my favorite singers, India Ari, is on it. The part of my dad is read by a great singer, R&B blues guy, Kev Mo. And ukulele, Jake Shimabukuro, the Flecktones, Jeff Coffin. There's tons of people on it. So it's fun to listen to.
Yeah, oh, that's great. That's great. There's so many voices. I mean, just from my experience knowing about your career and who you've worked with and stuff, there's so many people that I've kind of assumed are certain people.
Sure.
When you're talking about, I think there was a bluegrass quote in there that I'm going to bring up later on. But even there, I was thinking to myself, that sounds like it's ringing a chord.
Yeah.
Um, Victor, the spirit of music, it has a lot of messages. There's a lot to be said in here, and a lot that a lot of people need to hear, I do think. Um, the reason that I really reached out to you was because I'm concerned about the music industry. I'm deeply concerned about it. Even pre COVID, 2020 was hard for so many people. But in the last decade, even of my career, I've seen all the venues in London closing down. I've seen, although music education has become more available worldwide, it's becoming more and more diluted, and things seem to be getting constricted, smaller and smaller and smaller. And when I think about that, I worry. I don't worry about so much of what I can do, but I worry about what's going to happen to music in the future. And this is something that's very evident in the first chapter of The Spirit. Um,
Mhm.
where's your headspace on that?
I feel the same. It's a real concern. I treat the book as fiction, but the stories, the lessons, and the concerns are real. But it's not starting now. Our parents said the same thing about our music, and I don't want to be the old man who just complains. I'd like to look at it with empathy, not just complaints, with compassion, not just anger, and with hope, not just fear. But our parents said the same thing. You kids, music these days, blah blah blah. But it's true, as the first chapter says. We went from this, you know,
Yep.
where's the camera? We went from
There
this
it is.
down to this
Mm.
fast.
Yeah. Yeah.
So what our kids are growing up thinking is music is this. What they think is normal. So where do we go from here? When I was young, television was free, but we paid for our music. Nowadays is exactly the reverse. We'll pay for all these channels where we have to flip and flip and flip to find something worth watching, but we want our music free. Yeah, and even here in Nashville, that we call Music City, right? One of the main two streets, Music Row, that made Nashville, Nashville. A lot of those old places are just getting bought up and by developers, and we're losing history. You know, yeah.
There's there's so many levels just in those statements. If we talk about evolution in a positive way, we talk about our parents saying your music of today, and now we're saying it about people before. If we go back to say the '60s, and there's some lovely statements from say Keith Richards from the Rolling Stones, saying when he was in a studio, um, he was trying to persuade engineers. Engineering was very clinical back in the '60s. They wore white coats, and the thought of
Mhm.
distorting an amplifier was you don't do that. So he was. They were pushing, say, no, we want to distort. It's a new sound. So in that form of evolution was development. It was evolving. Everything was growing.
Right.
Um, we saw music schools popping up. Goldsmiths here in London came in the end of the '70s and stuff like that. But one of the chords you talk about is how you talk about in inches in the book. I'll leave you to give this intro. But how now it's the opposite. It's evolving, but it's actually diluting. Things are getting smaller.
Sure.
Talk to me about that.
To me, it's the same as getting your food from the garden or getting it from a fast food place or even yet in a package or a can.
Hmm.
The difference. And I think we know what that difference is if you can get it straight out of the ground. Well, our straight out of the ground music has been squashed. So it's not that the music itself is bad. It's not that the song is bad, the artist is horrible. Not that. It's just that music in its entirety is not reaching us, right? The nutrients that are in the ground of the soil that birth the food that we should be eating is not reaching us. Now we have to label real food organic and pay more for it. To get the real stuff, we got to pay more for it in food, right? We shouldn't have to label it. We should have to label the stuff that's not real. But the same thing is happening in music. And that's why I mentioned in there, we have to label some foods GMM, genetically modified organism, GMO rather.
Yeah.
And I raised the question, should we have to label music GMM, genetically modified music? Because it's not just electronically um, changed, it might be genetically changed.
Mm.
And this is me in the book talking about music as a real something, entity, spirit, right? It's a different type of life form, but there's a life to music.
Yeah.
And anyone who stops and thinks about it, or better yet, feels about it, knows that what I'm saying is true. There's
This
a
is
life to it.
this is very much about the consumption of music, but you lean very much on about the production of music as well. You talk about things like quantization and auto tune, and how all those things, that's what made performances what they were. That's what gave them the character. That's what gave them the life. And maybe by regimenting everything and putting this rigidity in place, maybe we're suffocating it. Maybe we're taking away from it even more. Um, because of digital tracking to be able to
But
go on.
let
Sorry.
me interject right
No, no,
here. I'm
please, yeah.
not saying that those tools are bad.
No,
Even in the book, I say I use them myself sometimes.
of course, yeah.
But when those take precedent
Mm.
over the quality of the music, in other words, we're using those tools to make the music qualify rather than the musician putting into something that's quality.
I hear you.
So, in other words, think about it. When you mentioned the 60s and before, the reason we knew about those musicians from the 50s and 60s was because of one thing: they were good. That was it. It wasn't that they had orange hair or they had to, perform naked, right? Aretha Franklin could sing. That was it. That was the only qualifying factor that would make sure that I got to hear you from way around the world, is that you were good. Willie Nelson was good. The Beatles, the Jackson Five, all of Motown, they were there because they were good. Number one, they were good. That's not the case these days. So what's happening is you take someone that's not so good, and I know I'm going to offend a lot of people when I say this, but I just got to say it. You can take someone that's not so good. Now we're using technology to make it good. That's like taking food that's unhealthy, but modifying it, putting in some sugar, some salt, some preservatives to make it taste good. But just because it tastes good doesn't mean it is good. That's how I'm seeing these technologies. The technologies are good. Put in a little dash of salt,
Yeah.
a little splash of sugar, but it doesn't take away from what it naturally is. The food needs to be naturally good. Then we can add a little icing to the cake. But if the cake is not good, the icing's not fixing the problem.
I hear you.
And to me, this icing is becoming more important than the cake itself. That's my issue.
Yeah, yeah, and I agree. I totally agree. What I was saying about things like these tools, exactly what you're saying, being overused more than actually just being a tool that's supposed to
But
support a musician.
they're being overused because they have to,
Yeah.
right? If a certain artist can't sing, we're going to know it.
Yeah.
So they got to use all these tools to genetically modify it.
So we talk about growth. We talk about planting maybe new seeds, if you want to be metaphorical. Where does the responsibility lie? Do we have to talk about education? Do we have to talk about, you say the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The second best time was today. That was a Chinese proverb, which is in the book. So where do we go from here? What about our generation? What's our responsibility now to move forward? Now, there's a thing suggested in the book. I don't want to talk too much and give too much away. We encourage guys to get out there and read it. But where do you see the immediate holes?
Well, everyone has to take a part. But as you see with governments and education and everything, we realize that in most cases, the world's problems need to be fixed or have to be fixed or are being fixed from the bottom up, right? From the people up. We start to fix things and then the government follows us. So we can't wait for our world leaders to fix it. We have to do it from the ground up. And one of the starts is to become real. Become a real musician, right? Don't just play the bass. Don't just make beats, right? Don't call yourself a producer, but all you do is use a drum machine to make beats. That's not producing. That's a beat maker, right? Just because you can slap on the bass and produce great solo videos on YouTube and get a lot of hits doesn't mean you're a bass player. Doesn't mean that what you're doing is wrong. No, but it doesn't mean that it's complete, right? So we need to be more real and we need to direct things. When we support, for lack of a better word, and I'm sorry to be offensive, when we support, okay, I'll put it this way, another analogy. If you support fast food, of course it's going to be easier for us to get. Then the problem is not the fast food, the problem is because of us, we're supporting it. So my thought is to make real music, be a real musician. And the best way is to start by totally feeling, right? Feel what you do, feel what comes in, do it with passion so that we are infusing what we do with energy, not just with technology. Because I can easily do a lackluster performance and fix it, make it sound good. But the energy of the realness has never been put in. It's been put in with fast food or fast music or technology. But if we can start from the beginning and sing well, play well, perform well, feel completely, less of that other stuff is needed. And what ends up happening is the feeling comes through. For example, Willie Nelson. I use Willie Nelson a lot.
You do, yeah.
Right? How much theory do you think he knows? Music theory. How many chords you really think Willie Nelson knows?
Yeah.
Right? Did BB King really know theory?
No.
Can he read? George Benson can't. Right? But they're playing for real. And even though Willie Nelson may only know a few chords, it only takes one to stop you in your tracks. And you can tell me you don't like country music. I'll play you a Willie Nelson song and you'll have to change your story.
I'd tell
Right?
one of my old bosses, Albert Lee. He won't like that.
Yeah.
Victor,
Yeah.
we talk about making music real, basically bringing back personality, soul, and the individual to musicianship as an instrument, as a tool to bring your internal musician out. Um, is there something that the actual schools and education system can be doing to help this, not just the individual? Now, I want to bring again a lovely quote from here, and it was about bluegrass. And he said in here that bluegrass is not taught in schools, it's taught under trees. And I love that. I think that's got an incredible charm to it. Um, what happens if we don't have any trees left, Victor? And what do we
Yeah.
do?
Well, in many cases, the trees have been taken place by institutions. And it's not that the institutions are bad. I'm not saying that. I love them. I teach at one.
Okay.
But here's the thing, and I see it happening. I saw it. Well, I wasn't there for it, but I know that what I'm explaining, again, I hate to sound so negative, and I also hate to sound like I've got the answers. I don't. I do have the questions. right? And together we can figure out the answers. But I see what happened to classical music, and it's happening to jazz, if it hasn't already happened to jazz. The most free music ever, jazz. We're allowed to break all the rules, right? Tell me to write notes, and I'm not going to play any of them, right? This is jazz. But now, jazz, which was way out here, is now this. Jazz is a curriculum, and you got to learn it this way. So, in many cases, education teaches teaches whatever they're teaching their way when it should be taught your way.
Okay.
Right? Think about how you learn to talk. Nobody told you how to do it. Nobody said, here's the first word you have to learn. Go practice these words. You don't learn to spell, read, and write before you talk. You do it your way for years so that you are solid. Your feet are firmly planted in your voice before we ever teach you anything. But in most institutions and curriculums, before you can do it your way, you have to learn our way. Because you're judged on, do you understand my way? Right? You're not judged on your way. So teachers, in my opinion, need to be taught and trained in recognizing the student and finding out what is driving that student. And then you teach from their standpoint. If the kid loves skateboards, you teach them that way. But it puts more demand on the teacher. But
How
it
does
can be
this
done.
how does this relate to? I mean, it's not by any means the chosen path that teachers have chosen, but it's the chosen path maybe this generation has chosen. But how does that relate to things like pre-recorded video lessons and things like that that are now readily available on the internet? I mean, obviously there's some wonderful platforms out there. I'm part of one of myself. I've seen you on them as well. We've both
Phil, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but
gone.
all of that stuff is great
Yeah,
as long as we approach it as a way to do it, not the way,
great. That's what I was looking for.
right? If it's a way to do it, wonderful. But your way should not supersede my way. But if I'm solid in my way and then I get to learn your way, now I've got multiple ways. That's beautiful. Beautiful. But in many cases, we're teaching as I know the way. And I'm looking at this person, they're 22 years old. You don't know the way if you're only 22. Music's been around a whole lot longer than that. But you're young. I love your way. That's something new. Let's learn it, but not the way, a way. That's the solution, I think.
Yeah, I like it. How do we, without just letting off the reins completely, how do we nurture the next generation? I mean, how are we going to actually make a difference, not rather than, like say, place a difference and follow leader? Because if things are getting more and more diluted, obviously that's a direction that we're being forced down. How do we change the direction and actually move people in a different way?
Number one, by first being better examples.
Okay.
Okay, in the US, people stormed the Capitol, right? Not to
Okay.
bring it political, but that's just an event.
Yeah.
Or we can say, basically the events that are happening in the world that feel bad, they're not done by kids. They're done by adults who should know better, right? The video games where the kids are killing each other, the music, or whatever, these are done by adults. So what are our babies seeing? Kids are mirrors. They will imitate whatever we do. So that's number one. We have to change. The adults have to change so that we become better influencers, better mirrors. The other thing is that we need to recognize who the kid, who the children, who the next generation is. Okay. And any parent, I don't know if you have kids, I have four. I'm the youngest of five. Both of my parents were the youngest. Not, I'm sorry, they weren't the youngest, but they had 12 and 13 siblings. I can't remember if my mom had 12 brothers and sisters and my dad had 11 or 13, but big families back then.
Yeah.
Any parent knows that every child is different. And any real good parent knows that, no, I can't treat this child like that one. Doesn't work. But as a parent, because we see them from birth, and you recognize it the first day that child enters the world with a personality. And on the first day, especially the mother, no, before the first day, the mother in the womb can say, this one feels different than that one. That mother knows already this child is different. But when they're born, we treat them different. Not because it is because they are different. And as parents, we recognize that. We don't have a system in place that allows us to do that with students. Because for me to keep my job as a teacher, I have to get enough students to pass this curriculum. I have to meet this whatever plateau of what they have to know, by this time, and I get it. And I don't have the answer to how to get around that. But when we don't recognize who that student is, right, that student will grow to be less than their capability, because in many cases they're learning things that don't light their fire, and then they think they are less than their capability.
It's something that definitely changed my path. What I want to talk is this is obviously about your text and your views. But I was a university lecturer for 6 years, and I saw curriculums becoming diluted. I saw key skills that I thought were essential to artist development. And I think, again, this is a chord. It's not about manipulating somebody to be something, but it's a skill set that people have to operate. It's a different perspective. It's like, here's the seed, go and plant your own, your own crops. But I saw that getting more and more diluted, and that was the reason why I actually stepped out of higher and further education to do it privately. And what led me actually to Scott's Space Lessons, which we're a very nice mutual ground for the pair of us. You're now at Berkeley. You do a week every month. Is that right? I think
that's correct.
That's correct. Yeah. We just spoke there about following constructive alignment, a sort of layout of courses and a curriculum. How do we now free that up then? How do you put kids through school, young adults through universities to study instruments stuff? How do we free them of those sort of restraints from curriculum and let them be the artists they are, yet still pass courses and things?
It would start by training the teachers.
Okay.
Right. It would start by training the teachers. The teachers, in many cases, in other words, especially like at Berkeley or other big colleges, a lot of the teachers, like you just told me, you talked to Bruce Gertz.
I did, yeah. I had Bruce on here.
Yeah. Now Bruce Gertz is a master.
Yeah.
You hear this guy play,
yeah,
right? But he didn't learn to play like that by studying curriculums in school. He learned to play like that by playing like that. He's done tons of gigs. He's been on the band stage where it went well, where it didn't go well. See, the older generation of musicians, we learned by doing. We played tons of gigs, we toured, we made records, right? But this generation is learning at it as a curriculum, not as a lifestyle, right? So as teachers, I think we should encourage students more and give them more opportunity to learn it the way we learned it, or else it's diluted. Right? If I teach you how to swim but never let you get in the water, only I've been in the water, or you get to get in the water once a week, 2 times a month, but you still get a degree as a swimmer.
Yeah. Good.
So, in other words, we have performance majors in universities that don't perform. But what they do is play a song a few times a semester. And they play the song well. But you should have a playing a song well degree, not a performance degree. So I think we need to find a way to make it real for the student. Take it out of the book. We can start maybe in the book and here's what it is, but let's go to the book. Like Berkeley's great. Berkeley, they have a gospel, what they call labs or classes where you're learning gospel music. You know, they have a rock lab. I got to see the Megadeth ensemble, a group of kids playing Megadeth. I got to see them performing for Megadeth, the real Megadeth, Dave Ellefson, all this guy. That was the coolest thing I've ever seen. But those kids, that was a great experience. But those kids, that ensemble needs to be able to go to a place with a real audience over and over, not just once in a whatever 3 month, 2 month semester. That gospel lab needs to go to some black churches and experience it. Right? One time in an old Southern Baptist black church would teach more than you can teach in a month from a book.
I Wow. I mean, yeah, I can 100% support that. I spent some time in your backyard in Nashville and in Memphis and Muscle Shoals, and just from being in the area, being in Fame Studios, seeing how they do things and all that sort of stuff, I learned more than I'd ever learned from a book. Putting it out there.
Absolutely.
Now we spoke about family. Let's talk about family. I won't make it too personal, but it's an interesting and a good chat. My partner, Callie, she has an 18-year-old lad called Ollie. He's studying music. He's at college. He's doing really great, and he's going to be a fine musician. I fear for his future, though, Victor. And the reason is that obviously I've seen, and again, I don't want to be negative because there's been some magnificent things in the last 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, 25 years. But in the, shall we say, the close history, just in the last decade or so, I've seen a massive decline of live music. I've seen a career. I've had to evolve again and again and again and develop new skill sets to continue to play my bass and do what I do and love. But as you've just said there, people are studying performance degrees and they're not performing. Victor, the biggest live venues, those club gigs, the gigs where you go, you make mistakes, where you played with your brother in Nashville, we've been, and you learn on the job. It's an apprenticeship. I remember doing a session and the battery went dead in my bass. I felt a fool. I didn't have a spare. The times where your cable breaks or you can't hear yourself in the monitors, all these things that are external resources, things that change performance. It's not just about playing your instrument, it's about the environment. If there's no venues, if there's nowhere for these kids to get on stage, if there's nowhere for young musicians, developing musicians, senior musicians that want to go out and start a career, if there's not a platform for them to do it, where are they going to learn those skills? Because right here in London, the absolute heart and soul, the arteries to the music industry during the last year, what clubs did survive have dropped one after the other. And we're going to come out into 2021, a fresh future. Like yourself, I'm optimistic. I'm hoping things are going to get good and we've all evolved. I'm sitting here doing a video call with yourself. And we were just talking about camera angles and stuff prior to this conversation. But if what was left was already narrowed, after COVID and after 2021, it's even smaller. Where is the platform now? Or where is the answer to give developing musicians those performance skills, their life degree, if you will? What do we need to do?
I don't know. That's my first and most real answer. But I do know this. Sometimes it takes getting so low that we finally see the truth or the worth of something. So it may take not having any venues for us to finally realize, wow, we need those venues. It may take that. Um, it will definitely take being negative. You know, we both say we don't want to be negative, and we sometimes it takes that. We don't want to be only negative, but we need to see the negative stuff so that we can work on it. I'm not trying to sugarcoat everything and say and only see the positive. But like this pandemic that has affected the world, I think a lot of good is coming out of it, and even more has the possibility because so much of taking has been taken away from us. In other words, if I see you right now, I'm not even really allowed to shake your hand, right? As mundane and normal as that seems. Now the next time I shake your hand, give you a hug, whoa, it's going to mean a lot, right? So I think this pandemic has the ability of bringing life, the meaning of life back, the meaning of relationships. When I can see you, your real face, and talk to you without a mask, those things that don't seem important. And I think venues is just something that's on the list that musicians understand. And again, I think the solution will have to come from us, from the bottom up, uh, and fix the problem. Because I think the governments and stuff, they don't frequent those venues that much.
Yeah.
So they don't have the same love that us musicians do. So I think the solution, whatever it is going to have to come from us.
Um, I'm in the process of setting up a new studio. I've moved house. Actually, we was in a rush to get live for today.
Mm.
In the process, I bought a beautiful set of live monitors. Very passionate about sound. Sound does things to me. I feel very happy when I'm playing my bass, when I'm listening to music. There's an inspiration that comes from music and being in that idiom that I don't get from anything else. Um, when I spoke to a friend of mine about that, his knee jerk reaction was, "You listen to music." He was actually surprised that I like to put on speakers and listen to music out loud. Music today has become a very solo thing. People listen to their phones, they put earbuds in, they're frightened to disturb the person sitting on the bus next to them if they're riding the underground, sorry, the subway. Okay, it's a very personal thing now, but it never was that. It was always a communal thing. I remember we used to always have a vinyl, a record player at home. And my parents would open gatefolds, they would read the booklets, they would talk about who was on the record and where it was performed. There was an excitement about that. A good friend of mine, Mo Foster, session musician, and another artist who's visited me here on With Bass in Mind, said to me that when somebody dies, it's like a library being burned down. If we're aware that music was a richer product, it was a more spiritual, it was a more expressionate product, is there not a danger of it being forgotten in that presentation because it doesn't exist now? Are people going to miss it if they've never felt it? And as I'm seeing now, is kids are on their iPhones, Android phones, any sort of phones, it's in their headphones. Actual community, the way that music's listened to and absorbed has changed. So if our responsibility is to breathe life back into music, is it not actually just creating something completely new for a new generation because they don't know any different?
The realness of it will speak to someone. The realness of music will still be there. It's not that it's gone. It's just that we don't recognize it. The same's happening with, let's say, dinner time. You know, how many families sit together at dinner time where it used to be that way? And it wasn't just my, my parents and their kids, it's grandparents. It was the tribe. It was so everything is doing this. I'm saying everything. I don't really mean everything, but
No, it's okay.
so it's not just music, right? So I look at it like nature. We are just diminishing nature, cutting down trees. But as we see with this virus, nature will win, right? Because we can't eradicate music. We can just change how music exists on earth. Okay, and this is what I talk about some in the book.
Yeah.
Music exists already. I can hear it in my mind. You can hear something in your mind that I can't hear. But for it to become physical, meaning a physical vibration, it takes a musician and an instrument, or something and an instrument, or a bird and a voice, or whatever. Then the physical vibration is born, right? And so, yes, we can diminish that, and we are diminishing that, but it's not diminishing what music really is, right? And that, whatever it really is, even once it's gone on earth, I believe that spirit, that soul, or whatever, will speak to someone, in the year 3021 or whatever. There'll be some wise kid that says, wait a minute, there's more to this. And all of a sudden, that person brings it back. So, yes, I don't think it's totally going away, because I believe that some child, and it may be a newborn or someone, it'll be in their ancient memory. And they'll want to, and they will do their job to make it life, or make it real again. So yeah, I don't worry that we can totally demolish it, no more than we can get rid of all the nature on the planet. I think the planet will win.
Well, let's hope it does win, Victor. Can I first of all say, metaphorically, it's been wonderful to break bread, my friend. And so great to see you. For the guys that are viewing now, myself and Victor's relationship, although distant, goes way back to about 2017, where we met in Florida, and we keep bumping into each other in NAM and stuff like that. So it's all good. Guys, The Spirit of Music, there it is. Victor L. Wooten. It's available now on Vantage Books. Obviously, you can get it from victorwooten.com. This has been With Bass in Mind. I'm Phil Mann, and this wonderful chap and gentleman is Victor Wooten.
Thank you, Phil, Mr. Man.
We'll see you next time, guys. Thank you.